Freddie Mercury, whose 75th birthday would have been today. And
okay, so the rule is that they have 15 minutes in between games. These two must have had an agreement to only have 10 minutes, because here we go, game 3, David.
Yep, breathless action. And
Yeah.
It's the Sicilian defence. And, yeah, one of the most counter-attacking openings for Black. Remember, Artemiev needs to win. And right now, he is thinking he needs to pick a variation. Will it be the Sicilian Knight-Off? Will it be... Yes, it is the Sicilian Knight-Off. He doesn't choose the Dragon, the Scheveningen, the Classical. So many branches of the Sicilian he could have picked, but he chooses the most popular opening in chess, pretty much.
funky queen move, where he's moved the queen 2 squares. Now he chooses to develop his light square bishop.
Yep, so one of the most traditional moves, one of the most calm, kind of composed moves you can play in the Sicilian Knight-Off, just developing the bishop, getting ready to castle the White King. Artemiev, he mentioned he's changing up his opening strategy, and talking of changing things up, we went from the Sicilian Knight-Off, which is to push Black's A pawn there, but now Black has pushed another pawn, and this is going to be a hybrid of the Sicilian Knight-Off and the Sicilian Dragon, and it's what we call the Dragadorf.
So he can pick up his H-pawn and move it 1 square. That's on the board. Another alternative was actually to provoke that pawn to come forward and push the H-pawn 2 squares.
Now I expect to see Magnus continue with piece development. One thing Magnus... OK, he does bring his bishop out. One thing Magnus can't do, and definitely won't do, is castle the White King over to the right side now. He's just weakened that flank too much. Artemiev definitely trying something new. He knows he needs to. What he's been doing so far hasn't worked. And that's just good advice for any player. If your strategy isn't working, if you're banging your head against that door and you're not breaking through from advancing even further, he does. He prevents any potential annoyances against that white knight.
5 minutes to spare. OK, the bishop has developed to its long diagonal, and we're expecting Magnus to step forward with the queen. So we're asking, if you had your kingdom, who would be the king and queen? And there you go. Magnus makes the move. My king and queen, borrowing words from Magnus Carlsen. Magnus developing his knight. Definitely, that was a lot of fun. OK, and now Magnus has castled to the long side with his king.
They're lined up against the pawn on that side of the board. And Kaya, you guessed the move.
Yay!
It's on the board.
These guys are just joining in our storytelling today.
Exactly. It's Beth's turn to shine.
Yes.
And she has pushed forward. This has initiated some real complications. But Artemiev, he needs to go for this type of gamble. If you give Magnus Carlsen too much time to stabilise, there's not much chance you'll be able to create a decisive attack. So he thinks that this is the moment, but it does come with risk.
Yeah, I was just going to say, 2 captures on the board. Which one would you choose? And Magnus has decided for us. Knight takes knight.
Yeah, and there were actually 2 choices there for Black on the last turn. Black then didn't necessarily need to capture back that knight. He could have captured the other white knight with Beth, the B-pawn, targets, that means, for Black's pieces.
Yeah.
And Black's queen does go across to try and target White's weak pawns on this left side.
If he draws, that's it. OK, we do have the knight move that you highlighted there. It's his favourite manoeuvre.
Stockfish's second suggestion,
Yes,
or it was, until suddenly that queen move, Jovanka, as soon as you mentioned it, disappeared from the top 3 move suggestions. So maybe there was a downside, but we didn't find out. We saw Black's bishop instead eliminate that white knight. This wasn't the number 1 suggestion. It wasn't even the number 2 suggestion, but it has meant that Black has got some time to advance some pawns.
Yeah, and Artemiev trying to open up lines, and Magnus says no. And now...
It's Anna again.
It's Anna again.
It's Alice.
But this time it's Artemiev desperately trying to open up lines, and Magnus now playing a great move.
You could eliminate this pawn if you want to be really safe. OK, Black meanwhile castling. But I was going to say this theme is going to continue. If Magnus had seen this pawn push forward, maybe he would push his own pawn, just keeping his king nice and safe, and this idea will remain over the next few turns. And Magnus, I mentioned the king might be the best blockader. He's put his king across. Good strategy again when you've castled on the long side. And now if the pawn pushes forward, Magnus will just block things up, either with a pawn push 1 square or 2 squares. Both seem fine. And next move, use his king as a blockader. But either way, it's making Magnus happy. And will that translate into a result? So, OK, that pawn has marched forward. So this is the acid test of White's whole system. We did see White just bypass that pawn and block it up.
Stepping forward with the queen. Another one would be just moving. OK, this one was also there. But what's the point?
There's no way into White's camp. OK, there we go. Magnus has pushed his pawns forward. Look at all those white pawns, all on light squares, all protecting each other. They're going to be backed up by White's king soon. OK. Black has given a check, so the white king in the corner The white king vulnerable on dark squares, but that's why white's dark square bishop is such a key piece. Give him something to think about. And, OK, black gets ready to push the pawn you wanted to, Jovanka.
Okay.
He brings his rook across first.
OK.
That makes some sense?
Definitely makes some sense, because now the pawn push will come with some potential extra power. Oh, it's Magnus trying to kill the game. You know, anything that Artemiev is doing, he's saying, I can do better.
Yeah, bringing his last piece to the party.
Yeah.
Sensible stuff. That's why Magnus is so good at speed chess as well as classical, because he plays simple moves.
Pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn on the board.
So the white light square bishop might step out of the way now and try to initiate some rook trades.
Ever gets into an endgame, say the queens get traded off, the A-pawn, black's pride and joy, will just simply fall off the board. Where to buy this lovely chess set in front of us?
Actually, this is a Play Magnus chess set, and I am absolutely sure you can buy it online.
So that way, unless Artemiev comes up with a really miraculous resource or tricks Magnus with something really cunning.
I agree with absolutely everything you said. But if you
There's
were
always a but, Jovanka.
yeah, there's always. Okay. But if you were Artemiev and you need to go into James Bond mode right now to save the day, is this the correct way to initiate some kind of action?
It's difficult because it's just a way up of the odds, right? OK, he's traded rooks meanwhile, because every move looks pretty... I mean, there's no way to save the game, I think, now with black. You're simply losing. You just have to try and gamble. What will Magnus feel least comfortable with? Where can I set a trap? I don't see any traps right now. I don't see Magnus being uncomfortable, but does that mean that this idea is a failure, or does that mean there was just nothing else? I'm not sure.
Well, there's a problem in this position that white is attacking the knight and black has been forced onto the defensive to defend this knight.
Use the black rook or use the black queen to get rid of white's queen or bishop, then maybe some small chances.
One of the things about this whole format is that Artemiev gets experience. You know, he was here as a kind of wild card, and then he ended up coming in second place and then third place, and then now challenging again for the first. I had options. Just thinking the H line.
OK, Magnus using brute force instead. I liked your move there, Jovanka, but Magnus giving up a pawn in order to free up another pawn. So if black takes that white pawn, then Gary, the G-pawn, is going to march forward. Gary, brother of Harry.
Yes. Yeah.
Sacrificed itself, though. And we have seen a queen sacrifice, actually, from Artemiev. He gave up his queen for white's bishop in the centre of the board. He had to. Everything else was losing. But it was only a temporary sacrifice, because now black's knight has jumped out the way.
Oh,
that
David.
is nice by Magnus.
Black's
knight jumped out the way, unleashing the black bishop. Again, it's created a pin against the white queen and king. And you mentioned you got excited here, Jovanka. The bishop took the pawn. Black's king could not capture that bishop because white's rook would have come up and given a deadly check, deflecting the black king away from the defence of its bishop. So Artemiev had to play this move. And now Magnus, so cynical, just trading off the rooks. He's heading for the endgame. Oh. This is going to kill, I think, all chances for Artemiev.
Yeah. And after rook takes rook, queen takes bishop, everything is under control for the world champion.
He will, for sure, have a big say in who wins the tour final.
And here comes the race of the pawns.
Yep, and notice this last move by white. It has freed up a square for white's bishop to use. So white's bishop will utilise the square that white pawn previously sat on in order to drop back and stop Freddie, the f-pawn. So white's bishop, OK, we won't see it yet, but the white bishop can drop back now, I think.
He has 10 minutes on the clock. He can work everything out. So he pushes his pawn, and now I'm going to suspect that Artemiev delivers a check. He takes pawn, and maybe his idea is just to give another check and then guard the pawn. Yeah,
so preventing Beth from getting coronated, from becoming a new queen. But look at white's bishop now. This is what we call the knight stable. We learned from Simon Williams, the Ginger GM, when he was trolling us. Oh, too many pawns for white.
Yep, and Artemiev setting one final trick, which probably doesn't even work. But, OK, Magnus cautiously advancing his king and is headed towards the c6 square, one step closer to the knight. And
yeah, white's king, notice how it's staying out of any potential checks. And here I expect to see white... OK.
I thought he was going to move the bishop.
Yeah, white's bishop could move. White's king can now go kind of the long way round to support Beth marching forward. There we go. that pawn is going to become a new queen. It's going to cost black a knight. And look, white will still have 2 remaining pawns, Gary and Beth.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just too many pawns here. And black's pawn under lock and key.
Yeah, I must say, a superb performance from the world champion today.
Yeah, Artemiev, he's done well, but he hasn't really stood a chance, unfortunately. He's tried his best, but it hasn't been enough. And now, look at this. 1 pawn marches forward, 1 is blocked, the other goes, and that causes Artemiev to resign.
Magnus Carlsen is the winner of the AIM Chess US Rapid, his 3rd tournament victory in the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour 2021. A dominant performance here in the final by the world champion.